are pollinators, and a lot of times there's, you know, host specific trees and shrubs that help specific pollinators. And then in the case of oak trees, I've got a little chart here, and you can see at the bottom, oak trees support 557 species of insects, and where a non-native Norway maple supports none. So when we use native trees or save native trees, we're supporting the insects that support us and wildlife. The other thing I love about native trees is they're adapted to our environment here in Indiana, and they need fewer resources. So they have really deep root systems. They don't use much water, or as comparatively speaking. Don't necessarily need to fertilize them. They're more resistant to pests in general, unless we have a pest like the emerald ash borer come in and kill all of our ash. But in general, they're more resistant to pests, as compared to something like crab apples that seem to get, and cherries that seem to get every disease and fungus under the sun and every bug. And so most of our native trees are a little more resistant. And they make make Indiana look like Indiana. I just love it that we have our own species here that we use. So I say this, I've said this for a long time, plants are like people. You get to know them, get to know their likes, their dislikes. And so after this many years in the business, I know most of these trees pretty well. And if anybody has any comments or questions along the way, just butt in. I don't care. So oak trees will always be my favorite. There's quite a few native species right here in Marshall County. You can go anywhere and see red and swamp white, bur oak and pin oak, and they're very prevalent in Marshall County, depending on your soil type and what growing conditions they like. But when I was in the landscape business, I always had a heck of a time selling oak trees because people wanted fall color, or they wanted blooms, and they didn't want leaves in their yard. So there's a lot of negatives about oaks, but to me now, especially knowing how important they are to insects, and when I say that, I'm talking about caterpillars to support migratory birds specifically. Oaks are it. And they're not as slow growing as people think. That was another thing that people would say, I want something fast growing. So we'd always go with the ashes and the honey locusts and the trees that grow a little faster. But I have some red oaks on my property that came up from acorns, and they are this big. And so they do, especially when Mother Nature plants them, they can grow pretty fast.
How long does it take an oak to start producing nuts?
Not very long. I'd say 10 to 15 years.
That's what I thought was 10, but I've had some planted and I haven't seen anything on them yet.
My bur oak, I have a bur oak that I brought home in Prices in the back of my Prius, and 5-gallon bucket, and that sucker is probably pushing 12-inch caliper and it has acorns. And I probably planted it 15 years ago.
Transplanted that I dug up in South Bend, brought to my house. It's been over 20 years and I haven't seen nothing yet.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah.
So
it's pretty big though. I mean, it's already probably 30 feet tall.
So I can't tell you. Don't know.
Well, I don't know variety either. I just seen an oak tree, dug it up. Yeah. I mean, it was only a big one, dug it.
Yeah. But I know my bur oak tree has lots of acorns already. So maples, I heard you guys talking about the sugars and the silvers. Sugar will probably always be one of my favorite shade trees. Sugars are actually quite a bit slower growing than oaks, I think. But in silver maples, they used to get dug up and transplanted. That was the back in the day when people built their houses and they needed shade. They'd go out in the swamp and dig up the silver maple because they knew they'd get shade on the south and the west side of their houses. But you still see some old farmhouses with silver maples around them. In general, I stayed away from silver maples for landscaping purposes, but But,
Why? Why?
they have very shallow, extensive root systems, and, now they're not as prone to wind damage as people think. They get so large that people have, over the years, they got chopped into topping them, and then that's when you get the weak juncture, and you'll get more wind damage after you top one out, actually. And native red maples, I feel like you guys, since you're master gardeners, you're pretty aware of things, but at the nursery, I would have people ask me for red maples. And I would always have to say, now, you want the ones that turn red in the fall? Because that's our native red maple. Or do you want Crimson King maples? Because they would always call Crimson King maples red. So true red maples are Acer rubrum, which is swamp maple or native red maple, and that's the one. I'd say that one has the most cultivars developed. So you'll hear October Glory, Red Sunset, all of those are cultivars of our native red maple. And then, to make things even more confusing, we've crossed the two of them. So silver maple had enough desirable qualities that fast growing, very tough. And then the red maples had the fall color. And so we crossed them, and now we have the maple crosses like Autumn Blaze, and there's a dozen cultivars of those. I've sold many of those over the years, and they've all been good trees. Some of them are seedless, so that's a plus too when you get a cultivar. People wouldn't go out to a nursery and buy a black cherry, but if you have a black cherry on your property, it's one worth keeping around. They do bloom in the springtime. They help out the pollinators, and again, being in the cherry family, they feed a lot of insects and really help our.
Is that what we are calling, my husband calls the wild cherry?
Yeah.
And they are native?
Yeah.
Oh, right, and they're good for the wildlife.
They're great for
Yeah,
wildlife.
we have a lot of those.
Yeah.
I've had them crows just in springtime. Crows are all over that.
No, I love black cherries, and I have a couple nice big ones on my property.
Is there anything with the leaves with livestock, especially horses?
They say,
That's what I've heard. I
Yeah.
didn't know if that's true or not.
Yeah. they say that. Same with red maple. So those two trees, supposedly, if you have them in your pasture, if horses eat them, yeah, they say they can be sick. So that is true. Our state tree, tulip tree. I love tulips. My woods is full of them. They are in the magnolia family, so if you've seen those yellow blooms, they're pretty cool in the springtime. They kind of get hidden by the leaves, but tulip trees are very fast growing. They are messy. If you have a good wind, you'll have a lot of twigs to pick up, but they don't have much fall color. So there's a lot of things about them that aren't great, but they just are a wonderful native tree. So I love to include them. I planted many honey locusts over the years. Now, obviously, we use the thornless and the seedless cultivars. Just straight species of a honey locust are nasty. They've got big thorns. Many a farmer has sworn about them, and but they are very, very tough trees, as you have seen by the ones that are planted in downtown Plymouth in the boxes, downtown. Those things have been in there for 40 years with no care, no watering during droughts, no fertilizing, and they're still hanging in there. I'm on the tree committee for the city of Plymouth, and so we are talking about, we took one out that was in really bad shape, and to see what we were going to get into when we took it out. But we're talking about replacing them. Honey locusts are hard to beat for street trees because they have open branching, so you can get that branching up as they grow, so they're up and above, and you can trim them. You can take a selective branch away from a building, and they still look good. So you can kind of shape them to a space, and they're so tough that it's hard to beat them for street trees.
Jody,
Yeah.
there's, well, one comment, these black locust trees, by the way. a
Yes,
lot.
well, they like the black oak.
Okay, but now the black locust, is that native also?
No. Not, again, native, they're not native to this part of Indiana.
Because the people who put property into, what do you call it, where their habitat.
Habitat, set
Yeah.
aside.
Therapy.
Yeah, so they came and walked our woods. And they suggested to us that we reduce the number of black locusts.
Right.
We have.
Right.
So that the oak, all the other ones can. So is that what you're seeing too, or?
So black locust has been transported here from a place where it is native out further east in the United States, but it wasn't originally here in Indiana. So it's a nuisance in many places, because it does spread and
Yeah.
seeds and.
Yeah.
What locust tree has the ground pod?
Right,
Which one? Is
that would be the
honey?
honey locust, yeah.
Well, we left them one year and then on the back patio and out in the yard because we didn't have time to rake them up. We had so many deer eating them. It was
Really?
amazing. Oh, they were on the deck everywhere.
Oh, gosh, I would have never thought that.
Yes, I never would have thought that too. We lived near the river and they'd come up by the river, tracks from the river and come in town and we'd sometimes have 20, 30 deer out in our backyard using those pods.
Really?
Yeah, it was amazing to watch them.
From the honey
Yeah,
locust.
I would have never thought that.
So the honey locusts are also the ones that do great big.
They will get the, yeah, right.
Yeah, so you would know.
They're good, it's good wood, it doesn't rot.
No, it's good wood.
Oh, it makes great fence posts.
And they use, that's why they brought the black locust here,
That's
because
what
it
we
does
do.
make great
Fence
fence
posts.
posts. Very, very hard wood.
Fence
But
posts are
they-
expensive.
Honey locusts and black locusts are completely different, genus, so they're not closely related. So
Isn't that interesting?
that's the trouble with with common names and Latin names. So, yeah, they're not related really. It's kind of got the same common name. So, I have to include American sycamore. Now, if you go out and you went to a garden center to buy sycamore, you more than likely get a cross, with a London plane tree. So London plane tree, so American sycamore, which this is the only good picture I can take of it. You guys are probably all familiar with American sycamores. They're along, water's edge usually, and they have the white peely bark and they get humongous and they have big leaves and they're messy. So it's not one you want to have in your yard, but I still love them. I still think they're beautiful. And so depending on your property, if you can put them out away from your house by a pond or something, in Lynn's case, that would be a good one out by her.
We
pond.
have at least 3 that we planted
Yeah.
around the pond.
We had a sycamore tree and it was the largest one that the tree cutter here in Plymouth who did it for the city. He'd been doing it for 45 years and he said it was the largest sycamore he'd ever cut down.
They
It
can
was
just get
huge.
huge.
Oh, it was.
But they also get a disease in the springtime, sycamore anthracnose. And so if we have a cool, wet spring, they'll leaf out and usually in May and they'll get their first flush of leaves and then that fungus will get them. And then they'll drop those leaves and then they get what they call a witch's broom, where they get it looks like they push new growth and they get these funny tufts almost on the end of them. But it doesn't kill them, but it makes them unsightly. So, and it does affect them. It can severely affect them if they're weakened else in different ways. So, but what we have done in the landscaping business is we have gone to a cross. So, with the London plane tree, which they are related, and the London plane tree is more resistant to that sycamore anthracnose. So we use.
Is there male and females?
I don't think so.
I didn't know. So I've got one that every year produces a pod or seed.
They get the kind of balls.
Yeah. They're kind of cute.
Yeah, just one of my trees that. I thought maybe there was a male and female.
American beech is one that's kind of hard to find in a garden center, or you're not going to walk into Lowe's and buy one. But, I love American Beach. I think they're spectacular trees. They're the ones that kind of almost hang on to their leaves in the wintertime when they're out in the woods, and they're the ones that everyone carves their initials on out, when they're out hiking. But, American beaches are very, very shallow rooted and very susceptible to damage. So I have seen in my career where people have had big, beautiful American beach and they built a house on a site and they've driven over the roots and, and stuff, and they will just go ahead and die. They just cannot take that at all.
Question.
Yeah.
I was at a gardening thing and they had something about a new problematic thing that's going to affect our beach trees in the area. Do you know
I
anything
don't.
about that?
I don't.
Um, They said it once, but that it's not in our area, but it's in some of the surrounding counties already. It just makes me sad.
I hate it when I hear things that are
Oh, I know.
causing problems. River birch, I think, have their use, but they are overused because people like them because of that multi-stem usually and the pretty peeling bark but they are not a number one choice for me in the landscaping because they are so messy. And they get descending branches, so if you've ever planted one in your yard, those branches just keep drooping down, and then you trim them up as far as you can go, and then they still droop down and you run into them while you're mowing, and they're and after a storm or ice storm, they're very, very weak wooded, which is a common problem with fast growing trees. Almost any fast growing tree that you have, they're gonna be weaker wooded, so you're gonna have more damage. So we use the river birch instead of white birch. People used to love the white birch and that got a borer because we're not in the right temperature zone for white birch. So we've gone to the river birch instead, and I mean, they can be beautiful, but again, I don't consider them a prime. I wouldn't want one if that was the only shade tree in my yard. But if you can look at it from a distance, they're fine. This is a tree that gets underused. And it has quite a few common names, but black gum has that interesting pyramidal form at some point in time. It just is naturally narrow at the top and comes down, and this is its fall color. That's what it's most well known for, but it is very tolerant of wet conditions. So you'll find it in swampy areas, wetter soils. So if you have a wet spot in your yard, or even we've been using them a little more now in our landscaping. People have irrigated yards, so they do very well in an irrigated situation.
That's commonly found in nurseries. Is that commonly found in?
You can find them. Yeah,
We got, we bought some from.
we always had them. Yeah, they're very slow growing. But they can and the leaves are shiny. They're just beautiful trees, but they are very slow growing. And sweet gum is not found here naturally in northern Indiana. It will grow here. It's more prevalent in the south, southern Indiana, and down in Kentucky and down south. You're going to find more sweet gums. But we've used them. I almost consider it more of a ornamental because it is slower growing here. It doesn't get real big, and it's got those dank balls, so people don't like those either. So, but you cannot beat the fall color out of sweet gum. They are beautiful. This is one that a lot of people don't know about, and again, it's not one that you're going to find in a garden center. But this one has a lot of value it does bloom. You can kind of see the blooms there. And this one will get quite large. Has those flowers, those little flowers have a little bit of a fragrance, and the pollinators do love basswood. So I love them. I think they're beautiful. These are a few more native trees that you'll find around in northern Indiana. Again, you're not gonna probably walk into a garden center and find them, but you might find them at a native tree nursery, or mail order but hickories, there's a number of, species and, of hickories that go around. You're probably most familiar with shagbark. That's the easiest one to identify. But, they are a beautiful tree. So if you've got them on your property, I say leave them. Hackberry are very prevalent in our woodlands here. Ohio buckeye, we see a few of those. I know where there's a huge one down by Culver, and they bloom. Buckeyes can be kind of cool when they bloom, and the nuts are kind of a mess, but they are pretty when they bloom.
You mentioned about a native tree nursery.
Mhm.
Are there any nearby?
Not really. There's a really good one down by Indianapolis called Woody Warehouse, and that's where I've gotten a lot of my trees for the office. And Kentucky coffee tree is one that is very interesting too. If you want something different in your yard, it's
Can you get coffee from it?
no. But you know what? I think one of the reasons why they call it that, you have to look, I think they did make like chicory, like some sort of like coffee out of them, maybe, I don't know.
I think it was like a coffee replacement.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
it kind of tasted enough like
Yeah.
it that when they didn't have coffee, that's what they used.
Yeah.
Was a root. And they dried the root and then
Could be.
ground it up.
I know where there is some, if you're ever down, if you want to see a Kentucky coffee tree, down at Tippecanoe State Park, around the nature center. They have some trees growing out there in their yard, and if you see this, if you're walking around, you see this tree, what is that? Because I had to look twice. It has a double compound leaf. So it's a very, very unusual leaf. And they say the wood's very pretty for wood too, I think. These are great understory trees or more ornamental trees. Amelancher will always be one of my very favorites. Juneberry, serviceberry. It's got quite a few names, but it's one of the earliest ones to bloom. So it'll be blooming here in another few weeks on the edge of the woods. You'll see it. And gets the fruit in June, which is very good to eat. You can beat the birds to it. And then it has good fall color too. So it's what I call a 3-season tree. It just has a lot of interest.
How big of a tree is that?
It'll get to be about 20 to 25 feet. It's definitely, and it will tolerate partial shade. So that's what's nice about it. You can put it as a,
What kind of a fruit did you say that? again was?
it's a little red fruit and it's just so good, so tasty.
The
And
birds love it.
the birds love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just it's a wonderful native tree. It's just not as well known as dogwoods. I used to just cringe when people would come into the nursery and ask for a dogwood. They are so picky about soils and they're hard to reestablish. And so if you have dogwoods growing in your woods, you're lucky. But most dogwoods that you will find at a garden center or nursery have been brought up from Tennessee. And that doesn't mean they're not hardy, but you're just already off to a bad start when you're trying to take that heavy Tennessee clay ball and plant it in your yard, and then you have to keep it from either drying out or overwatering it. And they just are hard to get reestablished. So it's never been one that I've ever recommended. I understand. I mean, there's nothing prettier than a beautiful dogwood, but they are just really hard to grow or transplant, actually. A lot of people don't know about blue beech. This is a great little understory tree. It doesn't do anything spectacular, but the nice thing about it is it doesn't flower. There's situations where you might want something where you don't want flowers or fruit, maybe by patio or a sidewalk or something where you don't want any mess. So this is a beautiful little small tree. And again, that 20 to 25 foot range, all of these are gonna be in that size.
That's the one they call the muscle tree.
Yeah,
It's got
ironwood.
Really cool.
Yeah. The bark is real, it's not really the bark, it's the trunk is very interesting.
Twist.
It's very smooth and
It's almost like
irregular.
snakes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And then they do have really pretty coppery red fall colors, so, blue beech is underused, I think, and very tolerant of different soil types. Red bud, I think almost everyone knows red bud, but, what they don't know about red bud is they do come in a lot of different cultivars, so, we've developed a lot of cool ones over the years. There's ones with red leaves, there's ones with like lime green leaves. There's some that are the leaping form. And then there's one that's white, called white bud. So again, red bud is a pretty good native understory tree. They are susceptible to some different diseases. And you could have one grow perfectly well for 20, 25 years and then just start going into decline. So they are, but they're definitely worth having. This again is one that most people don't know about. This is in the viburnum genus, and common name's black haw. And it is my dogwood substitute. So it's much more tolerant of soils, different types of soils. And it gets the pretty fall color. It blooms a little later than dogwood, and it does get fruit. So the birds absolutely love it. So if you're not familiar with black haw, that's a great one. I took this picture last fall. I think sassafras gets a bad rap. I think sassafras can be a beautiful, again, you've got it on your property. I love them. I think they're beautiful.
So are they native?
Mhm.
They are native.
Mhm.
Okay. The only problem is they're like weeds.
Kind of invasive.
They are aggressive natives.
Let me ask you something.
Uh-huh.
So I just purchased property and I have a lot of pine trees, and along the face of these pine trees, I'm getting a lot of sassafras.
Mhm.
Some of them small. So I'm cutting them off and might want to plug your ears, but I hit the root with a little bit of tore down. Your counterpart, Jim Vanderbilt, says, don't do that. You know, he said, he said that will leach into the soil and kill my pine
It
trees.
can.
Really?
Mhm. Yeah, it's safer. Your best bet on those, we use this fighting invasives, is not Tordon necessarily, but just a 50-50 mix of Roundup and water.
How about 3,4-D?
No.
2,4-D doesn't translocate. So what Roundup does is when you put it on a fresh cut, it will move down to those roots and keep that from coming back.
Good.
Sassafras in general are pretty shallow rooted, so even small ones you can pull up usually.
And you can dry them and eat them, or use them for tea.
Yeah, make them too. But I understand, a weed, the definition of a weed is anything that's grown where you don't want it. So sassafras are just, they can be beautiful, like in this situation.
Right.
They had a group of them, they let them stay there, they're out in their yard, and this fall, they were pretty enough that I stopped my car and took a picture. So they just are a pretty
The
natural
other
tree.
thing about sassafras, well, two other things I've observed.
Yeah.
Number one, they seem to attract Japanese beetles, and Japanese beetles love them.
They do.
And the other thing is, if they're kind of by themselves, they will grow up nicely.
Mhm.
But if you get like a whole group of them,
Mhm.
then they're twisty and turny and, you know what I mean? They're not pretty trees when they're like in a whole too
Well,
close
see,
together.
But see, I think, I don't know how to back it up. That was a group.
Yeah,
That was
but they were
left.
far enough apart.
Right.
I'm talking sometimes, I mean, they're right on top of each other.
right.
They're clustered. And then they seem to be weak.
Yeah.
then, and they
Yeah, when
break
they're
off.
weak anyway.
Yeah,
They're weak. It's, like I said, I wouldn't go buy one to put it in my yard, but if you've got them, they have their fall colors.
Great. Their bark is really cool too.
Yeah.
It's really deep ruts and it's just cool.
yeah.
Interesting with the Japanese beetles.
Yeah, they do get
you, Jack.
They do attract.
Yeah.
For whatever reason.
We have a couple native hawthorns. These are species that I've used a lot in landscaping. The Washington on the left is usually found like that in a multiple stem. And they get the orange berries in the fall, and the birds about midwinter, they're not the first thing they go for, but they do help the birds make it through the winter. So they have a lot of value, and I think they're pretty trees. They get some nice fall color too.
They're medicinal too.
And are they?
Yes, the hawthorns in particular, have benefit for cardiac
Oh,
ailments. So,
interesting.
Also for your circulation, for your veins.
The one on the right, it's not really dark in here, but you can really see it on my computer. Winter King Hawthorn. That one is just so beautiful, through the winter. And, those,
Do they have thorns?
the Winter Kings do not. The Winter Kings are, once in a while you'll get an odd thorn, but in general, I consider them more or less thornless. Washingtons are thorns.
So when I got growing wild throughout the woods, I thought they were hawthorn.
They probably are.
My folks called them thorn apple.
Right.
Is that all the same thing?
Yeah.
They got
Thorns,
monster
that
spikes.
one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Washington hawthorns, the one on the left, big thorns. Oh, and when we use them in the landscaping like that, we use them in a landscape bed. You can see that one's in a bed where you don't have to mow around it or get around it, so.
And you can get around that by just limiting them up.
Yeah.
And also they are beautiful in the spring. They have beautiful white flowers.
They do.
They're gorgeous.
I've been told they stink. You know,
I don't think these.
I always, again, when I sold trees all those years, I would try to tell people the good and the bad. You know, I wouldn't want them, I want them to know everything, because no tree is perfect, but they, now this is one, I don't know, a lot of people in this area have never seen one of these. They're native to southern Indiana, but they will grow here in northern Indiana. And if you ever get a chance to pick one up, they are stunning trees. They're medium-sized trees, so they're gonna be in more that 25 to 30-foot range. Mine bloomed for the first time this past spring. I was just waiting. It's been in since 2008 when my daughter graduated. I planted it. And I brought it home from the nursery, and it was about 1.5 inches, and you know.
I think there's one on North Michigan Street here in Plymouth, and it's stunning.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So their fall color is that bright gold yellow, and they just have a really pretty form. And everyone that I talked into buying one has enjoyed their yellow wood.
we got one yellow wood from you
I got
guys,
you into it.
and the fall color is stunning. But no blooms yet, but.
Yeah, well, when they bloom, you just get so excited. So-
What time of year do they bloom?
Spring,
They are in
Yeah.
spring, okay.
What colors?
they're hard to see. I mean, they're not real showy. They kind of get lost in the leaves, but it's still pretty exciting when they bloom. So these are, I call these the non-native introduced, so they do no harm. And we use them, you know, there's ginkgos all over in Plymouth. There's some big ginkgos if you know where they are. Ginkgos are so unique, and that this is a good picture. I picked this one out on purpose because I don't know if any of you have ever seen this, but ginkgos drop their leaves in one day. So it's pretty cool. It's like they turn that bright gold, and then one day you'll just go by and they're just like falling like rain. They all fall down and create this gold carpet underneath the trees. Ginkgos are very good street trees because they're very, again, slow growing. One of the slowest growing trees there is, I swear. But they are very resistant to, there's really no bugs or diseases that bother them. And so they're very long-lived. And you want to make sure you get a male cultivar, because this one does come in male and female. And the female has fruit that smells like you've stepped in a pile of dog poop.
See, that's what I've heard.
And it's true.
that you don't want a female
No,
ginkgo.
that's why if you get one from a nursery, they only have the male.
What does it
cultivars.
smell like?
Like dog doo-doo.
Oh.
Yeah.
So like there was a big one at Purdue and I cut through this courtyard and there was this big ginkgo and I was like, oh, it's so gorgeous. And I get out of there and I'm like.
Multi-step.
So I mean, it's seriously, it's bad. And then this is another one. So I talked about American beech. But European beech comes in a lot of different cultivars that are just all stunning. The most common one is purple or copper beech that has this red color. So, there's one called fernleaf beech that is beautiful. There's just the straight green one, but almost everyone that gets the European beech wants the copper one. And they just can be so beautiful. The one that died on the corner there by Lincoln Junior High, I cried the day that night. They cut that one down. It was beautiful on the corner. There is a native crabapple, but almost every crabapple that you would buy would be a non-native species. But that's okay. They don't do any harm. They do a lot of good. So it's definitely one you can, no matter what your situation, you can find one if you want pink, if you want white, if you want small, if you want tall, if you want fruit. There's a cultivar for every situation. Crab apples. So a little more maintenance with crab apples because they're so susceptible to apple scab and different diseases. So most of them, we've kind of gotten away from the species or from the cultivars that got it really bad. So the pink blooming crab apples would get apple scab so bad that they wouldn't have any leaves left by the middle of summer. So if you really want your crab apples to look good, you have to kind of put them on a spray schedule in the springtime or buy a very resistant variety. Japanese maples are one that I can't say a bad word about. They, again, come in different forms. They come in green and red. They come in weeping. They come in different forms, and they're beautiful ornamental trees. They just are worth having. This, the tree hydrangea on the right is mine. When limelight tree hydrangeas first came out, I decided I needed one and I took it home and put it on the east side of my house, and it's quite large because I don't prune. But they are easy to manage. So this type of hydrangea blooms on the current year's growth. So you can basically cut them way back if you want to keep it smaller. But this was the hot tree. We didn't even have these. Well, we did. Okay, I'll back up. There was one called PG hydrangea. There's a couple of them in the cemetery here in Plymouth. They kind of weeped a little bit as they got older, and but that was it. That's all you had. And so it wasn't a real common, but about 20 years or so ago, they came out with limelight, which is mine on the right, and then quick fire, and there's a zillion cultivars now. But this, almost every landscape has the tree hydrangeas now, and for good reason, because they bloom for so long. The blooms are on them for 2 months, and the bugs don't bother them. They're very tolerant. They'll grow in partial shade, full sun. And if you need a small tree, they're hard to beat. The tree on the left that's blooming yellow is actually a type of dogwood. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Cornelia and cherry dogwood,
I
but
have one.
I know I sold you one of those too.
You were a good customer.
She was. Great customer.
Like, they went out of business.
Well,
So,
they retired.
Okay.
so I would always, I wrote an article on this one, said this cherry is really a dogwood. So it's called Cornelian cherry because it does get a fruit, a really large red fruit. But it blooms yellow very early. People could mistake it maybe for forsythia because it blooms about the
Yeah.
same time.
It will bloom soon.
But so it's a very early bloomer and a harbinger of spring. That's what I call it. Very early and very tough. So again, it's a dogwood, but compared to a just a regular flowering dogwood that I was talking about earlier, this one, it'll live almost anywhere you put it. So so it was always one that I recommended pretty confidently. And then the tree on the right is Kusa dogwood or Chinese dogwood or Japanese dogwood, whatever. It's got several names, but it is a beautiful dogwood. It blooms in June. So our native dogwoods bloom early. So this one is great. I always like to use this one for people that had lake houses or something because they got here later and then they could see their dogwood bloom. But it is much more less susceptible to dogwood and anthracnose. So we started using more of the Kusa dogwoods in the landscape.
They also produce a big berry.
They do. It looks like a strawberry.
Yeah.
Very
raspberry
funky.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they say you can eat it, but it really doesn't have any taste, but you can use it and make jellies and stuff.
It's real funky looking.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a big,
Wow.
yeah, it's a big ball.
If you've ever been lucky enough to see a mature paper bark maple, pretty stunning. You can't really see as so much. I tried to find a good picture. This is a small ornamental maple that has the tan peeling bark that is just really stunning. And then it gets the good fall color like that too. So again, slow grower, very slow, yes. But worth waiting on. If you go down, I'll tell you where there is one. I drive past it all the time and I think, I wish we could move that thing. You know, the street that goes by, if you go out of Kroger and go west and kind of work your way, like you're going back to Oak Road or to, goes the back way. Right. That street that connects Ventus to Kroger, that street. On the north side of that street, there was a business. It's right next to the old Chase Trucking. It's not Chase Trucking, but it's the next business to the east. And they spent a lot of money on trees back when 30 years ago, maybe more than that now. But they put a paper bark maple in it. And it's right there close to the road. And it is a stunning specimen. And I always think, there it is at a business that's falling down and it's just
Is it on?
that connecting road there.
Western Avenue,
Is that Western Avenue?
well, that where the dentist used to be.
It's on the corner of
There,
Zenit, so
Containers.
It's that, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Western.
Well, Western, I don't know. It's on one of those streets.
Western runs north and south.
Yeah.
It's the other one.
Yes, it runs
That's
east and
Eagle- I
west.
think it's Eagle Craft.
It's at Eagle Craft. That's
Yeah.
exactly
I'm
where
gonna
this
look
is.
for it now.
I am too. I use that road all the time.
This is at the old Eagle Craft. That's who we did it for the old
Yeah.
Eagle Craft factory.
Yeah.
Yep. And then European hornbeam, you'll see those around because of their unique form. You know, there's just sometimes when you got a situation where you need a upright columnar type
Are
plant.
those the trees that grow up at Mishawaka, kind of?
They probably use them on the street.
Yeah.
There's actually some there's columnar maples, there's columnar oaks, there's a lot of columnar trees.
Is there,
But this is very common,
yeah.
used in the landscaping. The magnolias, sold a lot of magnolias. The star was again an easy one, and the saucer, gets the big pink blooms, and will get quite large. The saucer gets quite a bit larger than the star over time. But, and of all the ornamentals that I've talked about, these two tolerate the most moisture. So if you've got a low spot in your yard, these, magnolia will actually be pretty happy there. I did do a little section on evergreens. I love evergreens. Technically, we only have about 2 evergreens that are native to Indiana and they grow in the south. So red cedar, which is a juniper, grows all over in the hills of southern Indiana. We have a few that have worked their way up this way.
Are those ones that are real prickly?
They're very prickly, yes.
Yeah.
And there's like one species of pine, small needle pine. Again, I think it's either jack pine, I think. Other than that, no evergreens are really native to Indiana. And so all of these there's a little patch in the middle of Indiana where the Canadian hemlocks, glaciers brought the hemlocks down and dumped them out around Turkey Run. So there's a few that are down there, but in general, you won't find hemlocks just growing around. But I love Canadian hemlock. I think it's a beautiful evergreen. The deer like it too,
But they can take more shade.
and they can take more shade. You're right. They will grow in almost an understory situation if you've got a little bit of shade. American arborvitae gets a bad rap, I think. The most commonly used cultivar is emerald green. It's the one that people use constantly in the landscaping, and then the deer eat it. But there's also dark green and techni, and they get much larger than the emerald greens, and the deer don't seem to bother them as much. But they can make a really pretty screen, and they get big enough, they can be a wind block. They are very susceptible to bagworm, and you have to keep an eye out for that. You use arborvitae.
Is that the green giant?
Green giant is a western arborvitae, so it is not. I like green giants.
Well, I think you sold us green giants.
Yes, I do. I love green giants. They are not native.
Right,
They're western arborvitae, but the deer leave them alone.
well, not completely.
But they're more deer resistant,
More.
and they're very fast growing, and they're very beautiful. White pines, again, not native, but they do very well here in sandier soils, very fast growing, and can have their use. I will talk briefly about Black Hills spruce because it's a little more, I use this one instead of blue spruce. And blue spruce is one that I would never recommend to anyone to ever plant one. Unless you just want one in your front yard for 10 or 15 years, put lights on or something. But when I see people that have gone out and gotten blue spruce seedlings and use a double row of them for a windbreak or something, I just cringe. Because they are so susceptible to needle cast and fungus, and you are going to be cutting down in 20 to 30 years. So it's kind of like, it's just not one I would ever recommend for a situation like that. If you want one in your yard, they can be beautiful, but they're very susceptible to disease. Black Hill spruce is much more resistant. It's actually a type of white spruce, and it does have on the back side of the needles, they're not that bright blue, but they have a white cast to them. So they have a similar growing habit, and it's a good substitute. It doesn't get as large. I do mention there's the we talked about the juniper, the eastern red cedar, so. There's some pretty good, cultivars. There's one called Wichita Blue that has been chosen because it's got a little bit bluer color. That's the native. So yes, so I mentioned the Colorado blues, so. People like them, people still ask for them, but I just always say. Just know that you're gonna have problems down the road. Bald cypress, again, one that's not native to Indiana necessarily, but it will grow here and it makes a great tree. Likes the wetter areas and it's not really an evergreen. It does color up, gets the rusty color in the fall and drops those needles. The same way with those trees that I also listed, Dawn Redwood, you'll stumble across the Dawn Redwood in a garden center occasionally. Very old tree from Europe and I'm sorry, from Asia. And very interesting tree, but they do drop their needles, so it's kind of fun. I sold one once in Indianapolis and I told the people that it's gonna drop its needles. I know I did. And then the next year they called and they said, my tree's dead. It dropped all its needles. And no, they do that.
I have a question about the tamaracks.
Yeah.
Do they have the long thorns on them?
I don't think so. I've honestly never run across a tamarack. They used to be native to like the Grand Kankakee Marsh over to the western corner of the state. That whole area was full of tamaracks. And, but then when they drained it and cleared it and all the tamaracks are gone, but you can still find them around in that area. I've just never seen one. So I don't know about the ones. I don't think so. Norway spruce has been a really dependable, this one's not native, but we use it a lot still for windbreaks. It's pretty hard. We're so restricted with evergreens. So it's one that's still pretty resistant to fungus and it does grow fast. It will make a nice screen or a nice windbreak in just a few years. But as they get large, as they get much larger, they start losing their lower branches and they get very, very weepy. This one still looks somewhat upright, but as they get large, they start getting the big weep going on.
I have a tree that's an evergreen tree, I call it, but it has little blue things all over it. Would you know what kind that is? They almost look like little baby blue seeds all over it.
Well, the junipers have blueberries.
And that might be what it is.
Yeah, the eastern red cedar will get covered with blueberries that they make gin out of.
Is a spruce like this gets the blue.
The spruce will not.
Oh, which one did you say?
The juniper,
Oh,
the red, eastern red cedar.
Eastern.
It's prickly, it has a bluish color to it.
Yeah,
They'll get lots of blueberries.
well, that might be it then.
And here comes the, please don't. I've been preaching about Bradford pears for seeming like half my career now, but I actually, when I started in the soil and water office, I actually offered a bounty on calorie pears and paid people to take theirs down and put up a native tree. So it's just really all over the Midwest. We've been trying, Ohio, it's illegal to sell them anymore. We don't have them on our do not sell list yet, but if you've got one, consider taking it down. If you don't buy one because they're still available to buy. And
But like the Crimson King, that's not basically,
it is.
really.
So we found out on some of these that Crimson King is a cultivar of Norway maple, which I mentioned before. There's some green cultivars of Norway maple that are pretty good. There's some right here at the courthouse on the south side of the courthouse, Superform Norways. We use them because why would we use them rather than a sugar maple? I can't really tell you. They grow a little faster. They have really large leaves. They don't get as pretty color as sugar maples at all. Crimson Kings, everyone loved the Crimson Kings for the burgundy leaves. And so they've been, very a staple in the landscape business for, ever. But what they found is they're showing up in our woodlands really bad in Michigan. Not so much here yet, but they're working their way into our woods. And the Crimson Kings the seedlings from the Crimson Kings will come up green in the woods. And then they're crowding out our sugars. So, we want our native maples for our syrup and our native insects and stuff. So the Norway maples are getting into our woodlands and crowding out our native maples.
So that's the red leaf maple,
You always make that.
the red leaf maple.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
See, we only had one on our property and we
Right.
chopped it down.
They're so slow growing.
They are very slow growing. But I knew I was gonna do that. I shouldn't have. I got it.
It's just water. Here's a towel, Jody. See, I don't fall.
I don't want you to fall.
Oh, no falling.
So anyway, these other trees down the line, I've sold a lot of Japanese tree lilacs. I've sold a lot of Zelkovas over the years. So all of those trees, those first four, are very common landscape plants. And now we're like switching gears and we're saying, don't use these, because we're seeing them out in the
Yeah.
woods. The bottom three are not any that you would find in a garden center to buy, but you will find them on most properties, white mulberry.
Is that different than the mulberry tree? I mean, does it look,
There is a native mulberry, it's red mulberry, has a fuzzy leaf. Almost every mulberry that you will see around here is the white,
really? With the big berries?
the big bears.
And they don't want us to plant them.
And I like mulberries.
I know. I know.
I'll be all
Yeah,
purple by the
so
time
they're
I'm
just,
done.
we consider them invasive. We cut them down when we see them, but just don't plant them. And then Siberian and Chinese elm, they're doing the same thing. I have some on my property that I need to cut down. They just seem to find their way out, so, cause problems. So when you're talking about shade trees, you've got these reasons, why you want to plant a tree. So they, back before we had air conditioning, I mentioned before, the farmhouses, they go out and buy dig up silver maple and get them on the west and the south side of their houses to get shade as soon as they could. So shade used to be a very important reason to plant a tree, and I still love to sit underneath a shade tree. I'd rather sit in the shade than sit near.
Why did they cut so many trees down on the wetlands where Price's Pond is?
Just heard about that.
Yeah, they cut tons of trees down.
Yep, just heard about that today, as a matter of fact.
Did you really?
I haven't seen the county ditch runs through there.
Yeah, the ditch runs through there, but they cut more than was necessary. They cut a beautiful evergreen tree down and a willow tree and several trees.
I haven't seen it yet. I was gonna go by today and
Awful looking.
I'm sure it is.
Oh, boy.
So anyway, I still plant trees for shade and think everyone should. We talked about windbreaks, so if you're got a property out in the middle of nowhere and you get tired of having your hat blown off all the time, it's good to have a windbreak and privacy, screening between properties and of course add beauty, some spring flowers and fall color. They're all good reasons to plant trees. Increase property value. I think trees can properly place trees can frame a house, make a house look more beautiful. I just think they add a lot to the value of a property. We talked about food and shelter for the wildlife and the birds. They can reduce population pollution and save water. So I don't irrigate my lawn, but a lot of my lawn is shady and it's still green. And we go into dry areas. So, shaded lawns actually use less water. Provide food would be, I had that one on there for a nut tree or a fruit tree or something that we could use, for food for us. And prevent soil erosion. So, you're talking about those trees that they just took down along the ditch, or if you've got a tree along an embankment.
Wetland,
Right.
and they're putting a greenway back by that pond. But, I was told by the superintendent of the park, nothing was gonna be cut down like that, and they've just made shambles of it. It just was tree after tree after tree that didn't have anything even to do with the ditch. And, brush they cut all down. And
Yeah, we were talking about it
birds
today.
are upset because they're used to going back and forth to those trees, and they're flying all around trying to figure out where to go. And so are the deer, they're like standing there like, where is everything,
Well,
And I would have thought wetlands that couldn't have been cut down like that.
I really don't.
Terrible. You have
I
to
was
go
gonna
past
call,
it.
I was actually gonna call the surveyor to find out what
Well,
the
I
story
wish
is
you
on that.
would. I live there, by
Yeah.
the way, and
Yeah.
it just ruined any privacy we had with all the houses and,
I was actually afraid to go by there today. I was like, oh.
It looks terrible. They
Um,
did. It was just a butchered up, cobbled up job, what they did. And it's all the whole length of that side of the pond. And
The
the
east side
road too, the whole road, they just really cut tree after tree till there's almost nothing there. Well, the greenway's gonna go through there part of way, a bridge. And then I was against it. I thought it was green and natural looking. Now they're putting black, paving it with the black, paver stuff. And it's, I think they made a mess of a natural habitat for all the animals, is what they did. But you'll have to drive past it. You'll be shocked to see it.
I know. So when you're planting your trees, I say, first, the most important thing is choosing the correct species for the situation. So, you have to consider how big you want it to get, tall, how wide it can get, what the growing conditions are for the the soil type there, if it's heavy soil, if it's sandy soil. If it's wet, if it's wet spot, you really have to take all of those things into consideration when you're choosing a tree. And so the most important thing is to put the right one in the right place. As far as actual planting trees, I've said this a bazillion times. Plant it high, it won't die. Plant it low, it won't grow. So, when in doubt, set a plant a little high. Because if you end up setting it too low, which you can determine on the height, if you look on a tree, there's a root flare, what's called a root flare. So where it comes down and starts to flare out, you'll see that first root, and you want those to be toward the top of them. You don't want to bury that.
Don't trust what it is in the pot.
And do not trust what it is in the pot or a bulb tree too. So one of the things we ran into at Prices was, and this is not just Prices, it's nurseries in general. They get the liners from the West Coast. They come in and they're like 6 to 8 foot tall, and they take them out in the nursery and they stick them in the hole. If they even put those things in 2 inches too deep, then they come along with cultivators and then they throw more dirt on it, and then that just piles up. Well, the tree grows, but then they come in and they dig it up and then they put it in the ball, and now it's got 3 inches of soil on top of the root layer. Now we plant it in the yard, and maybe whoever plants it this much too deep. Then they put this much mulch on it. So you're basically suffocating that tree. And and trees take a long time to die in a lot of situations. And, but most of that is because of planting depth, sadly. The other thing, you might think it's a good idea to take all the soil out of the hole and put all different good soil in. Actually, that creates a problem. So because the water moves back and forth between the two different soils, and you can end up causing what I call, it's in my little article I gave you, a bathtub effect. So the water will move from this outside soil into the hole and then the tree will stay too wet. So you don't want to do that. So you can just break it up. The most important thing when you're planting a tree is to break that soil up and get it nice and loosened up and then just put it right back in the same hole. You can add a little bit of organic matter to it, but you don't need to add a lot. And then if you dig a hole, you want to loosen up the sides too, because if you don't loosen up the sides, so if you're digging a hole in a play area, and you're digging straight down for the hole, you're going to create a hard wall basically, and then when the root's trying to grow out, it comes in like into a brick wall. So again, we see that on commercial sites where you've got compacted soil and they come in with an auger and they just auger the holes and stick the tree in. Well, those trees don't, they hit that wall and then the roots start going around like this. And then, you know, it might take 10 years, but those trees die.
They don't change direction. They keep growing that way.
And I already mentioned about don't over mulch. So again, the mulch volcanoes, the mulch that's halfway up the trunk and down like this, and you're just gonna kill your tree. It sheds water, it keeps moisture on the trunk.
Doesn't it invite mice?
It invites mice. It's like one of the worst things that people do.
And put it right up on the trunk instead of away from it too, the mulch.
Right.
That
And-
doesn't help.
And so correct mulching would be a thin layer over the ball or the roots of the plant. And then take the mulch out a little taller around the outside so that it creates a bowl to hold your water that first year or two. And that way, when you put the hose on it and the water stays right there, it doesn't run off, goes right down to that root ball. But over mulching has killed many a tree sadly. Now, one of the things mulch does, another thing that mulch does in a good way is it'll protect the tree from damage. So what I call mower blight. So it keeps people away from the trunk with their mowers so they don't bang into that trunk and damage it. Girdle it. So mulch has its use. It just needs to be used properly. And then we also, a lot of times we'll put a trunk guard on them to protect them from the weed whacker or and in with young trees, if you're in a deer area, which I know Lynn knows about this, but the deer, they'll just find a new tree so fast. You'll plant a new tree and they'll just go right out there and rub their antlers on it. And, so we really need to protect those trees when they're young from the deer damage. And then some maples will get sun scald, so that the winter sun will actually create cracks, frost cracks and stuff. So if you protect the trunks the first couple of years, you'll help that tree get established. Fertilizing, we used to use, I still recommend a good water soluble root stimulator. And dump in a couple 5-gallon buckets of root stimulator fertilizer when you plant it. That just helps it get going. As far as granular fertilizer, I don't recommend anything in the hole. Because you can burn the roots. And then another thing that people have a hard time is figuring out that watering situation. So I've seen just as many trees die from overwatering as underwatering. So I tell people to water it in well when you plant it. And then depending on the size, if you've got a big root ball and heavy soil, you may not need to water that tree for 2 weeks. You might only need to water it once a month. So we have a tendency to water too much. And so when you let them dry out a little bit between waterings, that forces them to go root out and look for that water. So we find that trees get established a lot faster if you give them a little tough love and let them dry out. It's just a fine line between letting them dry out and dying. So it's key timing on watering. But in general, I've planted so many trees in the springtime and watered them twice in the summertime, and that's it. So, but just when you water them well, and, keep an eye on 'em.
Wait, how about this burlap though? There's some trees I remember getting where they said not to remove the burlap.
Well, I think that the burlap should be taken away from the trunk.
Okay, well, away from the trunk, but you
Right.
remove all the burlap?
Not so much, we just pull it all the way away. We have found in the city trees that the burlap actually repels water, can repel water and keep water from getting down in there. And then, we've gotten where we just pull that burlap back, cut those top wires if there's any. I mean, the ones that are below the ground, they'll rust away.
They will,
Yeah.
okay.
But, yeah. And then plus when you pull it, like you said, Christina, when you pull that burlap back, you can see where that root flare is. And then you can find out exactly, how deep it is to plant it. And then staking, you're really handicapping a tree to stake it on 3 sides because you're keeping it stable. Unless it's really, really wobbly in that ball, maybe it got dropped, maybe there was a reason why it got loose in the ball. You might have to stake it, but if you're planting a potted tree and you plant it and lean it a little bit toward the wind, into the wind, it might be not quite straight at first, but that wind, the movement of the wind will help it root. So I never stake trees. I just plant them, and then if I need to go straighten them up, I do. But it's overdone. And then plus staking, a lot of times you'll damage bark because the stakes, the wires get left on too long, or they wrap the wires, don't protect the trunk, and so you'll get a lot more damage from staking than I thought. So anyway, that's pretty much it, unless anybody has any questions or anything.
So there's an Indiana Native Plant Society.
Yeah, there's the Indiana Native Plant Society. It's a wonderful site. And then I always tout Dr. Doug Tallamy. I went up to Notre Dame and saw him this year. If you're not familiar with him, he's got great videos on YouTube. And he's written some great books, Nature's Greatest Hope. He's an entomologist, so he talks a lot about bugs. But I just love him, and I love all his videos. And he started a movement called Homegrown National Park. And so we are all encouraging people to use more native plants as we take them out. So if you think about it, one of the things we do as developers and when we build a subdivision, if there's any existing trees there, we go in and we take them all out, we take all the native plants out, and we put in lawns, and then we come back in and we put daylilies, hostas, Norway maples, and all these plants that aren't native, and it's basically a food desert for all insects. And so you don't have anything back in there. So what Doug Tallamy talked about is if we can replace some of these burning bush with a chokeberry, or there's good native substitutes for some of these common ornamental plants that we use, and we can help support the pollinators and the migratory birds and stuff. So he's great, and if you get a
How
chance.
about chestnuts? Chestnut trees that'll grow in the area anymore?
They're still trying.
I bought a total of 10, well, it's actually there's 11 maybe chestnut trees. And I have 4 of those that made it and are now producing chestnuts. 4 of them, yeah. So, but we protected ours, okay? I had friends who also bought these chestnuts, didn't protect them, and none of them lived. None of them.
Well,
The
they,
deer killed them, or they didn't. I don't know.
I don't know if
Maybe it was site or planting or whatever, but they're persnickety. And it took a long time to get them.
And the chestnut blight still finds them. So even yours, as they get older,
Could,
the chestnut blight can still find them.
it could, it
They've
could.
Purdue's been working for years on blight resistant chestnuts and
And I don't know whether maybe mine, because they're the only ones in the whole area. Maybe,
that helps. They're
It-
isolated.
yeah, they're isolated. So, I don't know.
Is there any tree nursery in the area now that you recommend? Is that one on Walnut Road out on Buckton? Is that still open?
I don't think so. I've been sending people to McKinley Terrace up in Michigan.
They have a good selection. But they also, may have some non-natives there. so
Oh, yeah,
you just
yeah.
have to be.
No, it's
you
not a
have to
native plant
really-
nursery,
Cause
but they
but
have a lot.
they have a lot. They have more than anybody else as
Right.
far as trees go.
Right. Who is that? It's
McKinley.
McKinley Garden Center. It's right in Mishawaka on McKinley.
McKinley Terrace, yeah.
And I still do landscaping and, I've been able to go there and pretty much find everything I need.
How about this nursery down in Rochester? Where was that?
Is there any state nurseries? anywhere?
Well, the garden
Yes.
center there has trees, trees.
Not a
The
lot.
greenhouse.
It's
Country
where-
roads.
It's where Jim Vanderbilt is going now, the business, whatever it is, South Mexico, there, the landscaping business down there.
Sellers?
Yes,
Sellers.
that's where they're going. Now, there's a nursery down in Rochester.
Oh, is
I'll have
that
to
right?
do-
Maybe
have to
there's
make some
another one.
inquiries.
I'll ask.
Question then about a couple of trees. We have a lot of pawpaw trees
Mhm.
in our woods.
Mhm.
Is that something that, is common in the
Oh,
area?
yeah.
Or is it something?
Oh, yeah, that's great.
They're native to Michigan.
Yeah.
Are they native
Yeah.
to Indiana too?
Yeah.
And then also Osage oranges. You don't see those very often.
Osage orange is one that is not native and they brought it in for hedgerows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Years and years ago. And, so it's one we don't like to see.
Okay.
They're messy trees too.
Yeah, it's a tree. I just wasn't sure if they were native.
Is that a baby?
It sounds like a baby.
Baby?
So there's no DNR programs that you can get, trees to.
Well, the DNR still has their plant nursery. Over west in Jasper, Plasside, that you can order seedlings from.
They're
Um,
small, they're
yeah.
small. And in my experience, we got some. I can't plant those out, they're too small to plant out. So I planted them in pots and then buried the pots down in a bed because I feel like I need to get
Yeah.
it bigger before I can put them out on our property. And I think your situation would.
Yeah.
You have to baby them a bit and.
Well, a lot of my property's in a DNR program anyhow, and every time I fill out paperwork, every year I have to do that. I always ask them about, or put on there about trees, I never hear nothing, to see if I can get, because they said, that I was told by forestry people to go out and gather up acorns if you want, and just basically try to scatter them out and see if you can get stuff. I've done that a few times. See if I can get some.
Deer need a lot of the acorn.
Yeah, I don't have very many oaks. That's one thing I don't.
Yeah.
Well, and you were talking about the invasives that are coming into the woodlands. Right now, doesn't the county offer or at least have some kind of program that you're working with? Is that?
I
on the
have a
invasives?
grant to work with woodland owners, yes.
That's what I,
It's a cost share. So if you have some acreage and you want to control the. you have that grant.
The only problem when the guy came to survey our land, and lots of it we've cleaned out, we've worked on it for years of the invasives, but, they want you to go through and spray to kill it all. And, I get very nervous about all these sprays,
Mhm.
having it on our property. And, So that's the only thing that,
Yeah, I hadn't really heard anything. I knew you had kind of were interested in that, and then I thought we had seen it in our paperwork that came in the mail. And we have quite a bit of acreage too, but there too, we have a watershed. And I'm really afraid to use a lot of pesticides and herbicides and stuff like that.
ironically, it's my
Because-
neighbor that does most of the spraying. You know, the next farm over, and he has, it's a big tank that he pulls and, you know, now he tells me they're very selective, but I'm still.
Well, I know
Makes
we've got
me
the
nervous.
cyclone, we've got a bunch of other stuff trying to get rid of. In fact, we worked out so we could work out anymore. We had to come here. But yeah, it's hard to know when to use those chemicals and not.
I-
We don't generally do that.
I feel the best about cutting and doing a fresh cut treatment.
That's what I wanna do.
Yeah.
That's what. I
It takes
was
a
wondering.
minute.
More
Takes a-
time,
It takes a minimal amount of chemical.
right,
You can put it in a small bottle. I like to add blue dye to it, so I know where I sprayed. And then,
and then put it right on the cut,
put it right on
right
the cut.
afterwards. See, that's what Dennis and I are talking
Right.
about doing, going out,
With like
cutting.
a-
I'll put the stuff on, he'll cut, I'll
Right.
put the stuff on, and see if we can kill
What's
you
the
know,
best chemical to do?
Roundup.
Roundup.
Roundup. Yeah. But if you're just putting it on that spot, I think
Right.
that's
Well,
so
that's
much better than this massive spraying.
Right.
That's what we've been doing. Kind of like, we have a lot of roses, a lot of roses and
Yeah.
raspberries and stuff like that. So we cut them off the ground and then I wait until they leaf out.
Mhm. That's another way to do it.
And then I hit
If you, so they tell us, and I've done it both ways, that it's best on the cut stump treatment to do it in the fall. Because it's
suction down.
translocating the chemical to the roots down, whereas in the springtime, if we do it now, they're pushing the full up.
That's a
So,
good
yeah.
point.
So,
Yeah,
Might
I-
have to retreat it.
yeah,
maybe.
you might have to retreat.
all right, that's good.
Okay.
Jody, thank you so much.
Welcome. Enjoy it. And then I gave you guys my flyer is one I put together. The purple flyer is, I put this together because they're plants that are easy to find in most garden centers. You can just walk in and
Yeah.
these are native trees that most garden centers have and shrubs as well. So that's this list. And then I gave you a copy of my twig tips. When I worked at Prices, I did this blog thing. And, so it's just considerations about tree selection and then some planting.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if it's all right, we'll save some of it for.